Good morning, folks, and welcome to Driving Collaboration in Distributed Teams. My name is Kurt Peterson, and I'm one of the co-organizers of Agile in Action, which is a Charlotte, North Carolina-based meetup that started about 2.5 years ago. And we've grown to 1,600 members, and we're really excited to have you joining us today. We have what we think is a really educational and entertaining session. So here's what today looks like. We're going to spend a little time introducing ourselves, the three presenters, and as well as giving you a chance to introduce yourselves to each other. Then Kim is going to speak with us about mindset and methods of facilitation in a distributed setting. Laura's going to talk to us about collaboration. As time permits, we'll have a question and answer, and then we'll talk about closing and next steps. A little bit of housekeeping. Some of you may have joined by phone. What we need to have happening here is that you have a phone and video persona joined. So if you're on the phone and you're in a Zoom session on your desktop or phone, or I guess your desktop, you'll want to unify or merge those two so that you're a single person. Because what we're going to do in a moment is put you into breakout rooms. And we need you to have a single persona to do that. Otherwise, it gets a little bit disjointed. So just briefly, I'll just touch on Agile in Action, our meetup. So our mission is really to help you develop skills for those of you that are new to Agile in Action, and to help you succeed in your businesses, whether you're in a large organization, on a team, or a solopreneur. We're here to help you build skills that enable you to grow. This meetup is really designed as a learning laboratory. So we really encourage a lot of ideas and presenters to come forward. And there is a quality today that's going to be somewhat experimental and experiential. So we try and keep that theme going as much as we can. And lastly, we learn by doing. So the reason we're called Agile in Action is that we want to achieve agility, or sort of discover an agile mindset for ourselves by doing things in collaboration with each other, and rolling up our sleeves and playing with things. So that's essentially the focus we're going to take for today's webinar. So who we have with us today are our colleagues from the company I'm employed by, which is Applied Frameworks. John and I are featured as in slightly lesser roles because I'm hosting, and John is sort of working in the back office, going to help us out with the word cloud and just give us some more tech support as well. So I'm going to pause here, and Kim, Laura, and John, I'll give you each a chance to introduce yourselves. Kim, would you like to go first?
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Kurt. So my name is Kim Perensky, and I am a principal consultant with Applied Frameworks, so one of Kurt's coworkers, and I have been an Agilist for quite a while now, and love being able to share some of my experiences and thoughts in this space. So I'm really excited to be here with all of you today. Thanks for joining.
Hi, everybody. I'm Laura Richardson, and thank you so much for joining us today. I work together with these lovely people on your call today. My experience with Agile goes back quite a ways, although unlike Kim and the rest of the folks, I tend to focus more on the business side or the business teams. And I'm happy to share a lot of what I can in the hour that we have together, and happy to be here. Thank you.
Hey everybody, this is John Mulligan. I'm calling in from Richmond, Virginia, and as a lot of my colleagues have said, we've been doing Agile for a long time. I'm happy to actually say that Kurt was my certified Scrum Master instructor back in 2005, so you're definitely in some good hands with Kurt. Thanks.
Thank you, Kim, Laura, and John. And I am calling in from the Caribou Coffee in South Park, right in the middle of Charlotte. So really excited to be joined by three wonderful people and to bring you this online webinar. So here's what we're going to do. In a moment, we're going to put you, along with 2 to 4 of your colleagues, in a breakout room. So Zoom allows us to kind of partition our large group into smaller groups. And what you're going to do in your small group, you're going to have about 3 minutes to cover a couple of introductory questions. You're going to share your name with your small group, your hometown, whatever you consider your hometown, and what do you feel like is the single biggest challenge with distributed teams? So I'm going to stop sharing here, and I'm going to put you into small groups, and you're going to have a chance to take a few minutes to get to know each other. Okay, welcome back. Next thing we're going to do is we're going to turn John loose. We're going to put John to work. So, you know, one of the things I'm realizing with these online sessions in distributed settings is you just really get used to the elongated pause and silence, and you just get to enjoy it and settle into it. So John, so folks, please, what I'd like you to do now in the chat window of your Zoom session, so your Zoom session should have a chat window in the bottom right corner. I want you to type your single biggest challenge with distributed teams, and I want you to chat that to everyone. And what you're going to do is we're going to generate some responses that John's going to take and collect and put into a word cloud for us to give to us to view and reflect on. So you're just chatting your phrase that corresponds to your single biggest challenge with distributed teams. So I'm going to pause and give you a moment to go ahead and do that, and then we will move forward. Okay. Well, while John's taking those responses and working with them, what I'd like you to do is I want you to try a new capability in Zoom that you may not be familiar with. You might be familiar with it. At the top of your screen, go ahead and find the button that says Annotate. So there should be an Annotate button. And actually, what I will do here is present and then get a little smaller. So you should see a button that says Annotate. And what I want you to do, whoops, okay, there we go. What I want you to do is place a stamp, a heart, or a check in the square that you feel represents your favorite Agile value, your favorite Agile value.
So
it's
Kurt, in case folks can't find it right, it's right next to that you are viewing Kurt Peterson's screen. There's a little menu that says View Options. That's where I found it under, and then you scroll down to Annotate at that point.
Great. Thank you, Kim.
Sure.
So I see people, oh, we're getting some creative freehand. I see a written check. I like it. I see some stars, some hearts. Another written check mark. I see we have some artists, some visual artists in the group. I love it. So this feature is pretty cool. It's a way you can do things like dot voting with your teams, and you can really throw any canvas up here, because what we have is a PowerPoint slide, and then you can ask people to place their stamps or their checks in certain areas of it. So you'll have a chance to use this a little more as we move through this presentation or move through this session. John, do you have a word cloud for us yet?
I just finished it.
Okay, well, I'm going to stop sharing. I'm going to let you share and show us what you've got.
All right.
Show us your cloud.
So I found it, frankly, a little surprising because I typed the word communications in there, communication a bunch of times, but it turns out engagement seemed to be the one that kind of came up there as a pretty big one. But we see a lot of communications, relationship building, time zones, but engagement. Go with that is the word.
Yeah, I see collaboration, productivity, motivation. Interesting. Can you make that a full screen, John, and make it a little bit bigger? Is that possible?
Maybe. Let me see here.
Oh, nice, nice. Accountability. Interesting. Okay. Well, thank you, John. This is again another tool. The word cloud is a kind of a fun tool to use if you have a team and you want to kind of highlight certain aspects of it. So at this point, Kim, I'm going to ask you to share a screen and take us into the next section of the presentation.
Sure, absolutely. Happy to do that. Okay, to present here. Oh, we don't want to be there yet. Let's do this. All right, we're going backwards, but okay, so you got a little preview there. It's like your life going backwards. Okay, well, folks, obviously the reason why we're all here is because the pandemic has obviously sparked a lot of interest and focus on remote working arrangements. And, it's interesting because for many of the teams that I've worked with in the past, this is actually nothing new for them because they've already been distributed across the country or across the globe. But then there's this whole other set of organizations and teams that are finding themselves in this like suddenly remote situation, and they don't necessarily have the right tools or the practical experience to effectively engage and collaborate in this remote way. And so, having the right tools and frameworks in place is really important, and we're obviously going to delve into some of that in this call today. But before we do, I really wanted to focus on having a strong facilitator. Because even though strong facilitation is really important for in-person interactions as well, when you are remote, it is absolutely essential. So, if you think about, facilitation in general, but particularly from a remote standpoint, it's really about facilitating with intention. And so I kind of see this as, your what, your why, and your how. Now, I'm going to assume that all of us here, if we're pulling people together into a meeting or a collaborative session, that we probably have a good sense of why we're doing that or what that purpose is. Although I will say, there have definitely been times where I've been in meetings and we're all looking at one another saying, I think this could have been an email. But we're going to assume that for this conversation that you probably have a good why. And you probably also have a good sense of what you're expecting that collaboration to look like or that session to look like. Maybe you're trying to pull folks together to get some shared understanding on something that's happening. Maybe you're trying to generate ideas or make some decisions about something. And you probably have this vision of what you want. You want a productive meeting. You want folks to be engaged and collaborative, and they're all like really into it. The problem comes in with how do I make that happen? And so that's where I've kind of dubbed this term a 333 framework, if you will. And it's really for the facilitator. It's the facilitator's framework. And it's about thinking about you as the facilitator yourself, thinking about your participants, and thinking about your approach and the session itself. And then what are the three environments and the considerations and the dimensions of all of those. So I'm going to get into those in a minute, but before I do, I was wanting to get a sense of what are your conference call pet peeves. Now, I've listed 6, and I'm sure we could find dozens more across all of us. But if we're thinking about just these 6, what are your 2 biggest conference call pet peeves? We're going to use that annotate function again, and just to remind you how it works, you go to View Options, go under Annotate, and then there's the option for a stamp. You can pick whatever stamp, but if you want to use the star or check mark, and vote for your 2 biggest pet peeves. I could probably do a few of these right now, like heavy breathing, whatever. All right, very interesting. So the votes are still coming in, but I definitely see a few that are, more clear winners here. The point is, apparently nobody cares about kids because maybe we all have them, or I don't know. But so that's good to know because I do have 2 kids that can be very noisy at times. But the idea here is that, okay, some are getting more votes than others, but the point is, as the facilitator, these are all disruptions and distractions. And as the facilitator, we need to do our best to try to take care of these things. We can only do so much for the other participants on the call. There's obviously some things we can do to manage that, but for sure, you yourself as the facilitator should not be the disruption or the distraction. So how do we make sure that that happens? All right, well, think about your 3 environments. You as the facilitator, you've got your personal, physical, and technical environments. And so from a personal standpoint, you want to be video ready, whatever that means for you. What is going to put you at your best game? For me, I'm going to want my hair done. I'm going to want my makeup done. We've probably seen that commercial. I don't remember the product, but the guy's on a call and he's got the laptop on his lap and he kind of drops it all of a sudden and goes to grab for it. And everybody on the call sees that he's still in his boxer shorts. That's not being video ready. So how do we make sure that we're there? And then when we're in this remote situation, especially, kind of being forced to be remote, you're probably going to be on a lot of calls. So how can you exercise self-care? Make sure that you're eating ahead of time, not during, but ahead of time, and make sure you have water, and just be in tune with your personal self. If you're just getting over that cold, have some tissues or cough drops available. Just be aware of you as the facilitator. And then you want to get your physical environment ready. And so I call this being video ready step 2, right? So that's all about what's behind you. Is there sun shining in on your face? Do you have dark shadows so you look like you're a villain from some movie? What does that look like? Do you have a big pile of dirty laundry sitting in a basket that everyone can see, which is exactly what happened when my husband was on a call the other day. And everybody on the call was talking about this gentleman that had this big pile of dirty laundry. So just be thinking about those things. And then eliminating existing or potential background noise. I'm staring at Kurt, who's sitting in a coffee shop, who's obviously managing his noise level very well. But in general, you want to try to avoid coffee shops and airports and being in your car and so forth. And then thinking about those potential background noises. The kids are going to come home and slam the door. The mailman's going to come and the dogs are going to bark. So how do you manage that? For me personally, clear desk equals clear head. And then from a technical environment, I have terrible Wi-Fi where I live. I'm near the beach. I don't know if that has anything to do with it. So I like to call in from my phone and then use my laptop for the sharing and the video. So that way, if something happens with my Wi-Fi, I still have some connection to that call. And you want to close unnecessary apps and avoid embarrassments, such as my friend who was sharing his screen and another person not in the call sent an instant message that was very unflattering to another person on the call. Avoid those situations. But have the other apps that you're using available, loaded up, ready, passwords, you're not forgetting those and so forth. Make sure your devices are ready and then log in a few minutes early to make sure that there's no issues, because I've been on some calls lately, the bandwidth for these tools is going crazy. I mean, everybody's on them. And so you want to be aware if there's some issues. So I guess what I'm trying to say is don't be this guy. I don't know if y'all remember him, but he was on a live interview on BBC News and he forgot to lock the door. And in comes kid number 1, kid number 2, then the wife, and internet sensation overnight. So we're just trying to avoid that situation. All right, so what I want to know next is what is your video preference? So I am going to start a poll here that hopefully, can you all see that, hopefully? I'm curious to know, given the choice, which would you rather do in terms of video participation? Hopefully you can all see that now. So go ahead and take a few minutes to vote on that. Okay. I think most folks have voted, and this is pretty telling, because even though I think we as a society are becoming much more familiar with using video, it's not necessarily everyone's strongest preference. They may play along, but as you can see here, even within this group, the large majority would rather not use video if they don't have to. Let me share these results if you can't see them. Hopefully everybody can see those. So yeah, so 40% would rather not use video whenever possible. And that makes things very difficult from a remote situation. So let me stop sharing that poll and close out here. So this is what I wanted to highlight here, because when you're talking about, you next need to think about your participants. So I do recommend publishing an agenda in advance so folks know what's coming. And then also in that agenda, highlighting the idea that, hey, we're going to use video and this is very strongly encouraged. But this is where I would stop you and say, don't force it. So strongly encourage it, but meet participants where they are. Because even though it may sound counterintuitive, there are actually some folks that will probably be more engaged if their video is off. Maybe they didn't get a shower that day, and they would be very self-conscious if they were on video. They'd be thinking about that and not the content of the meeting. Maybe they're worried about their background. So again, meet people where they are with that. Think about, I was gonna also say that if you are having a meeting over an hour or an hour and 15 minutes, I highly encourage you to actually build breaks into your agenda. That way people know they're coming, they can stay engaged, but know that they'll have an opportunity for some self-care. And then think about their time zones, because they might be physically present, but that doesn't mean they're gonna actually be engaged. and then the tools that your participants are using. We're using Zoom, which has a lot of great capabilities, but a lot of tools don't either have chats or companies are locking some of the capabilities down. So how can you promote and get the most robust feature set out of the tools that you're using? And if you're using a new tool, give folks the opportunity to test it out and play around beforehand so they can be comfortable with it. And worst case, allocate time in your agenda to accommodate that learning curve. And that might mean that you have to schedule your meeting to be a little bit longer. So then we're going to get into the third phase, which is the approach, or the meeting itself. And there's 3 dimensions to this. And I have a quote here: how you enter a space and how you leave a space is as important as what happens in the space. So let's talk about that a little bit. So how you enter a space can really be helped through the kickoff. As we did here today, we started at 11:05 because we knew that technology is a challenge, and when you're trying to log in and connect things and so forth, you need a little bit of that buffer time. We also are recording this and let folks know that that was happening. And then it's important to establish working agreements, such as some of the examples that I have listed here on the side. When you are working with a team that is together quite a bit, you could create these working agreements in advance and then add to them or change them as needed, and then you're just reinforcing them in the meeting itself. But if you're pulling together a group of folks that don't normally collaborate remotely together, creating a set of working agreements is really powerful and helps move things along. And what I would recommend is that you as the facilitator are not dictating these agreements, because they are agreements after all. And so you want to also get the buy-in and input from the participants. And then lastly, I encourage you to use a check-in protocol. So a check-in protocol is really just a very simple technique to allow folks to engage very quickly in the meeting within the first couple of minutes. So it allows them to be present, gives them a voice, might even provide a little bit of self-awareness of like, oh yeah, like where am I mentally? I'm trying to get myself engaged in this session. And the hope is that if you engage them early, that will also mean you're engaging them often. So I'd like to give this a try with all of you. As you can see, there's lots of different ways that you can do a check-in protocol. One of my favorites is the one-word check-in. So I'm going to ask all of you, what is one word that would best describe how you felt as you were joining today's session? You know, what was your state of mind? What were you thinking? So go ahead and type your one word into the chat window. All right, I'm seeing all kinds of things. Hangry, happy, energized, excited, intrigued, conversational, so forth. Stressed, rushed, okay. All right, very good. Busy, unsure, frustrated, late. So this is really helpful. So as people are typing, feel free to keep typing, but I'm going to keep talking. So the idea here is that this should be very fast. It should be under 5 minutes for about a group of 8 to 10 people. We are not necessarily going to elaborate on these things and create lengthy conversations. I'm not going to say, now, Elizabeth, please tell me why you were feeling frustrated. Let's delve into that, because that's not the point of the meeting. But at the same time, as the facilitator, I can at least be aware of that. And some of these feelings might end up getting addressed in the course of the conversation throughout the meeting. Maybe as the facilitator, I will follow up with some folks after the fact, but it really is meant for the individual to also feel like they kind of can sort of let that go and be part of this meeting. So highly encourage the use of a check-in protocol. All right, so next up is thinking about the actual meat of your meeting, the heart. And this is where it gets back to that purpose, clarifying your goals and your intended outcomes, incorporating tools and frameworks, which we're going to talk about in a few minutes, because the goal of the facilitator is to not do all the talking. You should be trying to figure out, how can I engage my participants so I'm doing the least amount of talking? And how can I encourage them to interact with one another, such as through physical breakouts if we're distributed but we're in rooms together across the globe, or virtual breakouts. Use decision-making tools, as Kurt mentioned, around dot voting and Roman voting and so forth. And then lastly, I encourage you to have a strong close. And this is where I feel like a lot of facilitators really fall down, because you can have a great meeting, but then everybody realizes they have their next meeting coming up and they have to rush off. So you don't actually get that opportunity to confirm if your goals and outcomes were met, and if not, what needs to happen, or recapping the decisions and the next steps. So make sure you allocate sufficient time for that. And like the check-in protocol, I encourage a check-out protocol as well. Very quick, different ways to do it. Maybe you ask them what their key takeaway was. Maybe you try to find out, well, what questions do you still have? We've talked about all this stuff. Where are you? What are you still, confused about? Or maybe you just make it quirky and fun and a little different, and ask them, if you could describe this meeting as an ice cream flavor, what would it be? Creamy vanilla? Maybe it was Rocky Road. How about salted caramel? So that way you as the facilitator can get a sense of where people were as they were leaving the meeting and help to make adjustments along the way and figure out what should come next. This here is just a sample agenda that kind of shows that breakdown. And as you can see, the kickoff and the close take up half my meeting. And so I might need to think about, as a facilitator, how much time do I really need? Should I be adjusting some of this? Do we have enough time to get to the heart of what we're trying to do? One other point I'll mention, this is just a technique and a tip you can try. I wrote my agenda topics here as questions. Doesn't have to be, but sometimes if you are writing the goals of the meeting as actual questions, it creates more of an invitation for your attendees. So these are just some of the things I think about when I think about facilitating with intention. And now I'd like to turn it over to my colleague, Laura Richardson, who's going to get into some more of these collaboration frameworks.
Thanks, Kim. I love that tip about writing the agenda as questions. When you say it, I'm like, oh yeah, that makes so much sense to me. But it's funny, I don't do that very often. So I think that's a great tip. Thanks for sharing that. All right, so let me share my screen here. And if I could figure out where that share button is, that'd be great. Okay, here we go. All right, so Kim was talking about how you structure meetings so that collaboration is supported, that the kind of impact of the meeting is what you want, like you're actually, it's being effective for everybody. And I was thinking, all right, there's a lot of different kinds of meetings, and I wanted to talk a little bit about a special kind of meeting where your participants are actually external. They might be external to your projects, or they might be stakeholders still working for your company, but they might actually even be your customers that you need to have an effective meeting with. So I wanted to share some of the similarities about what Kim was talking about, and then there might be a couple extra things that you want to do when you're actually bringing in external participants, and for the sake of maybe product road mapping or maybe product decisions or that kind of thing. So I've been involved in a lot of kind of what I'd call customer advisory board meetings, and I love them because the reality is you get great customer collaboration type meetings, and that's really what drives amazing products. And so, the Agile team is really kind of fueled by what do you learn from the customers that you're able to interact with. And I feel most energized when I see this kind of thing happening. I have a couple of photos here from a past collaboration with customer event that I did probably about 6 months ago. But our customers, when I was with a company called Centennial, they would come in and work really hard, right? Like we would ask them some really challenging questions, and the meetings were high energy, very interactive. In some ways, probably the hardest any of us worked that week was when we were all together with our customers. And at the end, people felt really happy about the work they did. So a lot of stuff went into it, and then there was a lot of celebration at the end. So how do we do that? And I think some of these are pretty similar to what Kim was talking about. But step one is you have to be very clear about what your objectives are. Right? Have a very clear, what I call central question. Make sure that the right people are invited, the right people are in the room. And the third one, which is what I'm going to spend probably a little bit more time talking about, is how do you make it interactive? All right, so let's talk about that first clear central question. Right? If I'm getting together with stakeholders in this special kind of meeting, I need to be very clear with myself first about, well, what do I need to learn? What am I missing? Maybe what I'm struggling with is prioritizing my backlog. So that's my central question. Please help me understand what things are most important to you. Maybe I'm thinking a little bit more about special segments of customers. Right? So maybe what I'm struggling with is understanding where my enterprise customers want to see me invest in my product. Or maybe I'm actually saying, look, I don't need any help prioritizing things when I'm struggling with our new ideas. Like, I don't really know what my customers have problems around. So maybe I have a very kind of open-ended kind of idea generating type question. Those are very different questions, and how you respond to them, or how you create a customer advisory board meeting or a stakeholder meeting, how you create that agenda is really going to be different depending on your central question. The next thing that this also helps you do is to make sure that you're inviting the right people, right? If I'm looking for help on investing in my product from the enterprise class of customers that I have, I'm probably not going to, I'll probably feel kind of sad if I show up and there's all my SMB type customers in there, or stakeholders that don't really represent that point of view. So just make sure you're inviting the right people to that meeting, and you'll have a much better outcome for sure. And this is where I wanted to spend a little bit more time talking before we ran out of time today. So making a meeting as interactive as possible is important, I think, for most meetings. Most meetings are about decision making. To do that, to make it interactive, really people respond best when they're given an activity, or what I like to call a collaboration framework. And a collaboration framework really is just a way to organize information. It's a tool that knowledge workers use. And when done well, it provides everybody you've invited to the meeting, it provides them with something to do, a way to contribute, right? So right now, while there's certainly a need for information sharing, and that's kind of what we're doing right now for at least big parts of this meeting that we're having today, I appreciate the fact that you're all listening. I'm sure what you're really itching to do is actually contribute, and we'll get to that in a second. But that's really what a decision-making or a collaboration framework does, is it provides people with a way to contribute their own information and to help with the decision-making process. And we know a lot of them, right? I mean, I think we did some count on how many decision-making frameworks are out there, and you find them in Harvard Business Review every month. I mean, there's got to be 1,000 of them that people are using. And some of them are more complex, like the canvases out there, value proposition canvas or the business model canvas. Some of them are actually pretty simple. Speedboat and Sailboat is a really common metaphorical framework that helps people understand what's working and what's not. It's often used as a retrospective technique for Agile teams, but it's always useful to kind of customer insights as well, because you can reframe the central question and make it about what do you love and what do you hate about my product. A couple other examples here about useful frameworks. Some of them, again, are very metaphorical. Prune the product tree, I use that often when I'm looking at investing over time. Think about, fruits of your labor or growing fruit, and typically the top of the tree is out in time, bottom of the tree is now. And you see a team that I've worked with using this metaphorical framework to actually make some pretty big investment decisions that they were struggling with in their IT organization. So they invited their stakeholders, internal, but their stakeholders were helping them decide where should we be investing. Could be as simple as a grid, and it could be, again, quite metaphorical. In that last picture, there's a team of people using Cover Story to figure out what does a perfect future look like. So instead of just listening and or talking, these things tend to be very interactive, which is great if you're really looking for some good insights. A little bit more about Speedboat or Sailboat. If you are just using anchors, and anchors are like Post-it notes that represent problems, what's really nice about this activity, and you can do it on a whiteboard if you happen to be in person, is you ask people to kind of identify what they're struggling with. So you come up with your central question. Each Post-it note or each anchor represents one idea, and you ask them to place it according to severity as well. So anchors that are at the bottom of the water are the worst problems they have, or the things they're most unhappy about, and anchors that are closer to the bottom of the boat might be mildly annoying. And if you added wind or wind puffs to this, then you're also collecting positives as well, right? Wind is what makes your boat go faster, and anchors are what hold you back. So this metaphorical way of organizing information means that every person you invite to your meeting has something to do, even if they don't want to talk. Right? They can fill out a Post-it note and put it on there. So that's how Sailboat works. And yep, you can do them online. So there's a couple of tools that we like to use, and I'm sure there's a whole lot more than this. So at the end, we'll be asking for some more input from you. But the two tools that we like to use for this are either in the Google Suite, there's something called Jamboard. That's a pretty simple tool, especially if you're using the Google Suite to do that. And the other one is called Weave. Both of them make it possible to do this with a remote team. And again, it means that everyone who joins your meeting, even if it's like a Zoom meeting like this, they actually have a way to contribute to help the team or the group solve the problem at hand. All right, so what I think we should do is try one. So in a second, I'm going to stick the link in the chat, and you can all join my sailboat. My central question here is, what do you find hard about your role when you're working remotely? And when you get to the tool, all you need to do to add your anchor is to double click under the boat. If you double click anywhere on that image, you'll get a little pop-up that says, what do you want to put on your anchor sticky note? And we'll just let that run for a couple minutes. And while I stick this into the chat, one thing that I will say that's different for facilitators and teams when you're working online versus in person is that, like I think, Kurt, you mentioned it, you actually have to be okay with a little silence. And so I'm going to do my best to not talk for about 2 whole minutes. And we'll just sit pleasantly with the silence while you guys all join this, and we'll see what kind of information we come up with. And to kind of give us all something to look at as well, I will share the screen that has my facilitator view, so you can also see kind of what I would see if this were a tool that I was using for a customer advisory meeting.
And Laura, can I add a little commentary here?
Please do.
One of the things I love about Weave is it encourages shared ownership. So I noticed someone up in the clouds, they put an anchor up in the clouds, being able to focus on what's most important. Well, you know, I'm a recovering project manager. I want to move that down into the ocean. So I might actually, because someone else wrote it, but I can actually pick it up and move it and slide it across the screen. So Weave is a cool tool in that it kind of gives everyone I don't know what you call it. It's equal rights in moving stuff around. So, you know, Kim might create something, John might create something, but guess what? I can move it around and I can actually comment on it and add something to it. So I just wanted to add that, Laura, about this particular tool.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, what I think is nice about using tools like this is that, again, all of you are now busy working on this, which I think is great. Everybody has something to add to my question. So I feel it's always a little unfair to have a discussion like this where you have a team of even 6 or 7 people, and we all know what happens. You have 1 or 2 or 3 who dominate the conversation, and you have 5 or 6 people who, at least I always like to say, the people who talk less are probably smarter than me, and yet I tend to be one of the talkers. So as a facilitator, what I really like to say is, okay, how can we provide a meeting where all types, all thinking styles are supported? And that means, you know, for me, combining something like Zoom with something like Weave, and it could be GoToMeeting and the Google Jamboard. It doesn't have to be these 2 tools, but providing a mechanism for addressing the visual, addressing the voice, and then addressing the very tactile ability to kind of think something through. You know, I was talking with a colleague of mine yesterday, but he reminded me that voice is only 10% of what people understand, and a full understanding of something comes from everything besides the words. So the words are important, but all these other pieces that help people make sense of problem solving, if you can replicate what tends to happen in a really productive in-person meeting, if you can tap into tools, tap into how you would structure a meeting and try to replicate that as best you can in an online situation, you'll get a much better result. So in this case, you know, I could be and many of our clients are, they're faced with, hey, we still have to get insights from our customers, right? We still have customer advisory board meetings scheduled, say, over the next 3 months. So for people who are like, oh gosh, now what do? I was planning on having 30 customers come in and spend 2 days with me, or I was planning on having a kickoff meeting with my internal stakeholders, But hey, there's, 35 people I'm inviting, and, some companies are saying, hey, meetings with 10 people or more, not happening, right? So then what do you do? Well, we've got actually a lot of experience doing that. And my biggest tip is to say, okay, we've got to figure out what tools we have access to so that we can still keep that meeting with our customers as interactive as possible. So if my central question for my customer was, hey, I'm looking for kind of new product ideas, I'm trying to figure out, well, what are the problems that my customers are having that I'm not yet solving? This could have been a great framework for that, right? What do you find difficult about distributed teams? And, there might be some ideas in here that I can look at. We're like, an unmet need that I can actually go and start to work on from a product standpoint. All right, so I am going to, and by the way, I know we're getting close to the end of our session today, so I want to invite everybody where as you start to think about some of the things that Kim and I have shared, if you have questions, please type them into chat. If we can't get to them when, before we have to leave all of you for today, we'll actually be circling together and putting together answers to all these questions, and they'll become part of the resources that we share with all of you when this webinar is over. So don't feel that putting a question in is pointless, because we will answer it, whether it's in this particular webinar or whether it's in our follow-up to all of you. All right, so I'm going to flip back into my tool here and share my the couple of remaining slides in my deck. So let's see, there we go. All right, so I'm actually curious. The next question that I've got for you is, what tools do you have access to now that you might be able to do this with? So I'm going to push a poll out to everybody to see if we can get some answers to that one. But what I would invite you, and by the way, you can scroll. There's I think there's 10 options here, and so you're only going to see the first 6 or 7. You can scroll through to see if what you use is on there. What I'm also interested in, though, is if what you like to use and that you think is good, if it's not on this list, I think we'd all benefit from finding out what that is. So if you know of something that's great that you might be able to use to make your meetings more interactive, type it into chat. Yeah, so we have definitely a bunch of Zoom users. Personally, I love Zoom. I didn't realize that we had the Annotate feature, even though it's been there the whole time I've been using it. So just in researching the content that we wanted to share with everybody here today, it turned out that all of us at Applied Frameworks had something to suggest that perhaps we were just assuming we all knew, but I had no idea that Zoom had Annotate, and I've been using the tool for a couple of years now. So it's like, oh, great, there's another way to just add some interactivity into the meetings that we're holding with ourselves internally and also with our clients. All right, so I'm going to, it looks like most people have responded to this. I'm going to go ahead and end that and share the results with everybody. So you can see we've got, let's see, a lot of Skype users. Interesting. Excellent. All right. I'm going to turn this back over to Kurt in a second, but there's just a couple of other things I wanted to throw out there for you in our kind of closing thank you. We are going to be sending everyone an email but some point this afternoon before the day is over. And we're committed to providing the deck that we shared, so you'll be able to download the deck. I'm really happy that Kim added some sample agenda and also her working agreements in there. I think both of those are really good suggestions. And sometimes it's just nice to see, somebody is thinking around what are good working agreements for having a meeting like that. But, again, Kim likes to definitely do that collaboratively with the team rather than dictating anything. So use those as suggestions, but let your team come up with those as well. So those will all be available for download. Applied Frameworks actually has some advanced facilitation courses online. One of them is instructor-led, and the other one is a completely on-demand offering. And so I'm going to stick links to information about those in the chat, but those will also be included in our follow-up information. And we also have all the advanced Scrum certification, all those are done online as well as instructor-led courses for teams. So I just wanted to make sure you were all aware that we had some of these extra resources available. You'll be getting a bunch of stuff just because you were here on the webinar, and you can download things from that page. And then I'll stick the links to these couple of new courses that we have that you might want to take a look at as well. So Kurt, I can turn it over to you if you want to provide some other closing commentary for folks.
Yeah, thank you, Laura. Thank you, Kim. This has been fantastic, educational for me, always working with you two. Kim, I'm inspired by you, and I'd like to ask everyone to check out with a word that describes the essence of today's session for you. So how was today for you? And we're going to, so go ahead in the chat window, go ahead and type in a single word that describes how today's interactive online meetup was for you. And I'm going to pause and let those trickle in, and then I'll say, I'll close this out. Excellent. I see some looks like some valuable feedback, informative, worthwhile, useful. Again, thanks for joining us. We will be sending out additional info, including the slide deck and some other ways that you can plug into this world of distributed, creating collaboration, driving collaboration in distributed settings. So Laura, Kim, John, thank you for being part of this, and we look forward to seeing all of you at another potentially online meetup or in person here in Charlotte. Take care.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.